Hello, everyone, and this is the Ballet Libretto. In this series, you are invited to come with me to explore the stories behind the world's most beloved ballets. This program is not only for ballet fans around the world, but also for people who love a good story. The ballet art form has a history that spans over 400 years, and at times it was political, but always evolving, always complex, and at the center of it, ballet was and still is about the human experience. Here at Nightglow Entertainment, we are entering into our second and final week of crowdfunding to raise money towards the production of our new ballet, The Prince of Barykova. The Prince of Barykova tells the story of a prince who takes a trip around the world looking for his soulmate. If you would like to make a donation, the link to the crowdfunding campaign will be available below in the description. Today, we are going to continue the countdown of the top 10 most popular ballets in the world. Ranked at number 4 is The Sleeping Beauty. Beauty is an old story, so it has a long history. Therefore, for the sake of time, we are going to try to keep this as condensed as possible. The earliest version of the story was written during the Middle Ages, approximately between 1330 and 1344. It appears in a chivalric romance titled Persephorist. A romance is a type of story that was popular among the nobility during the Middle Ages, that told tales of knights going on adventures. The Persephorist romance was written after the Alexander romance, which tells the adventures of Alexander the Great. Persephorist told the fictional origin of Great Britain. And the story preceded the Arthurian romance, which told the adventures about King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table. Why is this important? Well, the Persephorist romance begins when refugees from Troy, long after the Trojan War, flee to Roman-occupied Britain, which was known at the time as Britannia. Eventually, Alexander the Great and his Greek forces traveled to Britannia, and when they got there, the country was in turmoil. Alexander took charge of the country and appointed two brothers, Betis and Gadifer, as kings of England and Scotland, respectively. After being crowned king, Betis changed his name to Persephorist, and he becomes one of King Arthur's Greek ancestors. The Persephorist romance is divided up into 6 books. In one of those books, there is a story of Zelindine and Troilus. Zelindine is a beautiful princess from Zealand who is in love with the knight Troilus, who comes from Royalville, Scotland. One day, Troilus hears rumors that Zelindine fell asleep while using her spinning wheel, and she hasn't woken up since. Troilus seeks out the help of Venus, the goddess of love, Lucina, the goddess of childbirth, and Themis, the goddess of destiny, to find out how he can wake her up. When he arrives at the tower where she is sleeping, he finds out that she's naked. He tries to wake her up with a kiss, but it doesn't work. He comes back another day and this time he exchanges rings they gave to each other years prior. That doesn't wake her up either. He comes back another day and rapes her, but she still doesn't wake up. Zelendine gets pregnant and has a son named Benuik. When the baby tries to suckle one of Zelendine's breasts, he ends up sucking on her finger that was pricked by the spinning wheel. That is when Zelendine wakes up. But shortly after she wakes up, the baby is kidnapped by a creature that is half woman, half bird. The story ends when Troilus and Zelendine get married. They find Benuik, and he grows up to be a knight. Benuik becomes the ancestor of King Ban. King Ban becomes the father of Sir Lancelot, the same Lancelot who becomes one of King Arthur's knights of the Round Table. Fast forward to 350 years later. The French writer Charles Perrault decided to write a book of fairy tales which included Cinderella and the Sleeping Beauty in the woods. Writing was not Perrault's occupation. In fact, he was the secretary of Jean-Baptiste Colbert, who was the first minister of state and the finance minister to King Louis XIV. Colbert died in 1683, and it was then that Perrault possibly retired from government and decided to focus on writing. One of the places he often visited was the Château d'Ussé, which was located in the Chignon forest in central France. It was this castle where Perrault was inspired and wrote the story of Sleeping Beauty. Perrault told the story in two parts, but to summarize, the king and queen were trying for a very long time to have a child, and when the queen finally gives birth, she has a daughter. The monarchs invite 6 fairies to be the child's godmothers. However, a 7th evil fairy shows up and puts a curse on the child because she is offended that she didn't get invited to the christening. The curse is the princess will one day prick her finger on a spindle of a spinning wheel and die. The 6th fairy did not give the child a gift yet. She cannot reverse the curse, but she can change the curse. If the princess pricks her finger on the spinning wheel, she will fall asleep for 100 years, and the curse can be broken by the son of a king. 16 years later, the princess pricks her finger and she falls asleep. However, in order for the princess not to be alone when she eventually wakes up, the 6th fairy decides to put the entire kingdom to sleep and hides the kingdom from the outside world in a forest. 100 years later, a prince, accompanied by a hunting party, was traveling through the forest and finds the hidden kingdom. One of the attendants in the hunting party tells the story of Sleeping Beauty, in which there is a princess in the hidden castle that was doomed to fall asleep for 100 years until the son of a king wakes her up. The prince decides to take on the challenge of finding this sleeping princess. He kisses her, she wakes up, the spell is broken, the entire kingdom wakes up, and they get married. The princess has 2 children for the prince, named Dawn and Day. When it's time for the prince to inherit the throne, he takes the princess and their children to his kingdom. His mother comes from a family of ogres, so she is known as the Ogress Queen. She tries to hatch a plan with the royal cook to eat the children. However, the plan falls apart. The queen dies, and the new king and queen and their children live happily ever after. There is an Italian version of Sleeping Beauty titled Sun, Moon, and Talia that is similar to the story of Zelendine. And there is also a German version written by the Brothers Grimm titled Little Briar Rose. However, the ballet is based on Perrault's version of the story. The Sleeping Beauty ballet, for me, is a lesson in what happens when talented people get together and form a great team. Today, Sleeping Beauty is performed by various ballet companies around the world, but I am getting ahead of myself, so let's continue. Ivan Zavalosky was the director of the Imperial Ballet Theater in St. Petersburg, Russia, which is known today as the Mariinsky Theater. Surprisingly, he was a Russian diplomat. He worked in the Department of International Affairs. He was a Russian consulate in the Netherlands first, then in France, and it was his time in France where he became a fan of theater and French culture. When Alexander III became Emperor of Russia, Zhevalovsky returned to Russia and accepted the position of director of the Imperial Theater in September 1881. So when he took the job, he had no experience in management and no experience running a theater. In May 1888, Zhevalovsky had a conversation with Tchaikovsky about doing a ballet adaptation of the story of Undine. Later on, Zhevalovsky changed his mind and decided to do a ballet adaptation of Sleeping Beauty instead. Then, in the winter of 1888, Marius Petipa, the same choreographer who choreographed La Bayadere and Don Quixote, was brought into the project. Zhevalovsky took on the role of set designer and costume designer, and all three of them worked closely together to create this ballet. The world premiere took place at the Imperial Ballet Theatre on January 15, 1890, and this production included ballet dancers and ballerinas that later became some of the greatest names in ballet history. This is one impressive list, so here we go. Carlotta Brianza played the Sleeping Beauty, whose name is Princess Aurora. Paul Gert played the Prince Florimond, who breaks the spell. Marie Petipa, the choreographer's daughter, who was a ballerina, played the Sixth Fairy, known as the Lilac Fairy. Alexander Gorsky played the wolf to the Little Red Riding Hood. And Enrico Sacchetti, who would later become the famous ballet master that created the Sacchetti ballet method, played two roles, the evil fairy Carabosse and the Bluebird in Act 3. The ballet was such a success, it became the second most popular ballet in the company's repertoire, having been performed 200 times by the year 1903, and it was an instant success outside of Russia. Tchaikovsky never knew how successful the ballet became because unfortunately he died 3 years after he composed it. The Sleeping Beauty turned out to be Tchaikovsky's longest ballet. His original version was 4 hours long, but in later productions it was cut down to 3 hours. The ballet starts with a prologue in which the evil fairy Carabosse places a spell on the baby during the christening, and the Lilac Fairy has to minimize the damage of the spell. Act 1 takes place 16 years later on Princess Aurora's birthday, in which her father, King Florestan XXIV, invites 4 suitors from England, India, Italy, and Spain to meet Aurora. That is one of the famous parts of the ballet. Act 2 takes place in the forest where the prince and his hunting party are hunting for game, and he meets the Lilac Fairy and she explains the story of Sleeping Beauty. Act 3, Scene 1 takes place inside the sleeping castle where the Lilac Fairy guides the prince to find Aurora and he breaks the spell with a kiss. Act 3, Scene 2 is really the wedding reception. They call it the wedding scene, but it looks like a wedding reception because there is a series of divertissements that are performed by the fairy tale characters that have come to life. I don't remember if I ever explained it in a previous episode, but I will explain it here. A divertissement is a short dance that displays a dancer's technical skill that has nothing to do with the plot or the character development. So in Act 3, Scene 2, the first divertissement is a pas de trois, which means a dance for 3 people in French, between Aurora's brother, Prince Florestan, and their 2 sisters. That is followed by a pas de deux, meaning a dance for 2, between the White Cat and the Master Cat. The Master Cat is famously known as Puss in Boots. That is followed by a pas de deux between the Enchanted Princess and the Bluebird. The next divertissement is between Little Red Riding Hood, the wolf, and the trees. Then Princess Aurora and Prince Florimond dance together in a grand pas de deux. And the final divertissement is a pas de trois called the Three Ivans who perform a Russian dance. So the ballet ends with the wedding. Rudolf Nureyev staged his own version of Sleeping Beauty in 1973 in New York City. And one of the writers of the New Yorker magazine wrote a review of the ballet's history, and in the article he spoke about the partnership of Petipa, Tchaikovsky, and Zavolovsky. He wrote, "The three collaborators played each his different role in giving unity to the elaborate fairy. Zavolovsky had his conception of a glittering dance pageant mounting to its climax in an apotheosis to imperial splendor. Petipa had his sharp-cut scheme for a balanced and well-varied sequence of dances. And Tchaikovsky? He always delighted in the evocation of past centuries. It is Tchaikovsky's music that gives character to the heroine and expresses the inner theme which raises the Sleeping Beauty above the level of a pretty divertissement. Most of the fairy tales that adults go to the theater to see again and again symbolically enshrine truths about human experience and human behavior to make their pleasures more than incidental. In a preface to the Penguin edition of Perrault, Geoffrey Brereton remarks that it is tempting to adopt the nature myth interpretation and see the tale as an allegory of the long winter sleep of the earth, but adds that the allegory, if it is one, is obscure. Tchaikovsky's interpretation was simpler. His Sleeping Beauty is a struggle between good and evil, between forces of light and forces of darkness, represented by the benevolent lilac fairy and the wicked fairy Carabosse. Well, I hope that you have enjoyed this episode. Next week, I am doing a special episode of the Ballet Libretto where I share my personal story about the role ballet has played in my life. And one of the stories I'm going to share with you is my first time going to Lincoln Center here in New York City to see Sleeping Beauty. As I mentioned in last week's episode about Don Quixote, I don't consider myself to be a ballet aficionado. So I will explain how I ended up becoming a ballet fan who knows nothing about ballet to writing, directing, and producing a new ballet and the Ballet Libretto series. The campaign to raise money towards the production of the Prince of Barykova continues. The link to the campaign is located below in the description. Make a donation to become a part of history. Make a donation to usher in the next revolution of ballet. If you would like to purchase the Ballet Libretto, my book, The Journal of a Ballet Librettist, will be available on Amazon Monday, November 15th, 2021. Thank you to my subscribers, and if you are new to this channel, go ahead and click the subscribe button below. click like and share. Thanks for watching, and see you next time on the Nightglow Entertainment channel, right here on YouTube.